NECA builds a blueprint in terror. Here's your look at the NECA toys. This is the Alien 40th anniversary, the Alien prototype suit. In a remote region of the galaxy, the United States space tug Nostromo, carrying a cargo of mineral ore, makes its return journey to Earth. The ship's crew, 5 men, 2 women, and a cat, are awakened from their hypersleep chambers when Mother, the onboard computer, monitors a strange transmission. According to company law, the crew must investigate any signal indicating possible intelligent life. What begins as a routine search mission quickly escalates into a nightmare of unimaginable terror when the crew discovers and brings aboard an extraterrestrial life form. Before we get a closer look at the prototype suit of the Xenomorph, the first thing we're going to do is calculate just how tall the figure actually stands, taking the tape measure to the very top of its domed head. I would, yes, argue the point that probably most people aren't going to be displaying the prototype alien or any Xenomorph usually just standing straight up. You could really say that in the 79 film, it is probably the most straight. And then later on in the subsequent sequels, you usually see them more crouched and hunched over. Even though you probably won't be displaying it like this, for the purpose of calculating out just how tall the figure is, I've got it currently completely straight. Looking at the tape measure though, you're looking at the prototype suit Xenomorph standing 8.6 inches in height, and switching that to centimeters for those that follow their collectibles in the measurements of centimeters, then you're looking at the Xenomorph standing 22 centimeters tall. To see how the prototype alien stacks up with the other figures that we've already had a look at, we can bring in Ellen Ripley, and we can also bring in Dallas. If, of course, for some reason you missed your chance to check out the previous reviews of them, you should be able to find them easily on this channel. Just trek back a few other videos. But you can see, though, how much taller the Xenomorph is to the other human figure characters. As it should be, of course. It's a lot taller in the film, and equally so, it's a lot taller than the figures also released from the folks over at NECA Toys. I also just happen to have moved this one over, the original prototype alien that NECA Toys had released. We'll do some more comparisons in a second, but simply just to bring this one in so you guys can see the difference. This one, unfortunately, is a little bit more worse for wear. I think it's just because of the way I've had it stored away. It's warped the plastic on the leg slightly, causing the figure to have a little bit more difficulty standing. The molds are what seems to be exactly the same to one another, although when I am looking at the leg portions on the newer release, they seem like they're slightly thinner, and it's, if anything, I'm sure, just my eyes playing tricks on me. The prototype suit is based on the early pre-production suit that they actually used for the original 1979 Alien film. They thought it would be fun, in fact, to be able to show the viewing audience what the inner workings would be on the alien costume itself. But then they had some real struggles during the actual use of the costume, filming it and all that stuff, that they decided to scrap it in favor of the more opaque costume. Personally speaking, while I do like this one, it's clever the way that they've done this. I'm much more in favor of the more black costume myself. It's just more my preference, if anything else. One thing I will say to the credit of this one, it does have some interesting elements to it. Primarily when I'm looking at it, it kind of looks like the hollowed out kind of carcass of like an insect. If you've ever seen like an insect shell, for example, it looks very similar to this. You can't quite see through it, but one thing it does do, it does improve the original color scheme that the first one actually had. If you look at the two, though, it does seem like they've changed the plastic. Although both are clear, I feel like this one, the newest one, has a slightly more yellowish tint to it. In fact, the only areas that you can really see the true plastic at work is kind of underneath the crotch area there, where as you can see, it's just a slight more yellowish tint to the plastic that they actually used on this one. The big thing also that changes drastically between the two is that the paint that they applied over top of the plastic is definitely much more richer and yellow on the newer one versus the one that we'd gotten before, which comes across more like beige, a very off-white color. The head sculpts appear to be the same, doesn't look like anything has changed. It does have still the middle jaw, the inner jaw that opens up and drops out. This one has gotten a little bit loose over the years that I've had it. This one does still have, let me just go ahead and open this one up. This one does have it, but it's just a little bit tighter, and it's a little bit more difficult also to free the inner jaw from the inside. They have actually, to their credit as well, added some much needed paint to the teeth, where I feel like it was sorely lacking here on the original. You can still see, being that it's using a clear dome, the skeletal interior, as you can see, these socketed on the eyes, seems to stand out a little bit more, obviously, on the original one, and it sort of blends a little bit more on the newer release. As I said, though, the faces are exactly the same. There's nothing that's been changed. They haven't, again, reinvented the wheel at all. They've just found a better way to perfect it. I feel like the paint is much richer. It just looks more finished and complete on the newer one versus the one that we had gotten before. Even like looking at the original one, I'm not even sure if I had mentioned it in the initial review, but the paint sort of is just slopped onto the plastic in areas sort of sporadically, so it doesn't look like it's fully finished. I guess the intended plan was that you would be able to see inside and through it, whereas I feel at least, they've fixed it by adding much more paint to it. It still comes across translucent, perhaps not as translucent as the original one here. Let me just free them away from one another. It's not to say that you certainly couldn't still keep this one, because again, there's enough difference between them that you're not simply just getting a re-release with the same color scheme. No, there's enough changes done to it that I do feel like it warrants almost keeping both of them. Although again, this one, unfortunately, has suffered some slightly more warped legs over the years that have actually kept this in my collection. We'll move this one out of the way, because certainly we've already extensively looked at that one, I feel at least. And again, just for a size comparison, we'll bring in Ellen Ripley so you can see just how much taller the Xenomorph prototype is versus a standard human-sized figure. Quite considerably taller. Again, I know you're probably going to be bending the knees, you're probably going to be having it more perched and hunched over, but it simply was just to show you how tall the figure actually is. It's a very long figure. Looking at the head sculpt though, again, really nicely detailed piece with the clear dome on the top. I feel like they probably could have added something to the dome so it wasn't simply just clear plastic sandwiched on top of the skeletal head there. But you can see all the tubes and hoses. I believe in the original as well, when they were crafting the suits, they used, of all things, condoms to actually cover and make some of the tubes look more organic, I suppose, on the original costume. It's to certainly say, I don't know what the longevity would be by if they had kept the Xenomorph done in this more translucent yellow color scheme. Personally speaking, I don't feel it evokes as much terror as having that pitch black. It almost blends into the shadows. I don't feel like this one would blend into the shadows as much, although this one definitely looks a little bit more organic. You've got the ribcage, of course, there sculpted. All of this, by the way, is dense plastic. Even the lower section here is about the only area that actually starts getting softer plastic, but all the rest of it is very dense, rigid plastic. A few little spikes there on its elbows, for example. Of course, you've got the tubes sticking and jetting out from the back there, and it still has the little back section here that you can remove. This simply just unpegs, allowing the head to slightly tilt a little bit further back. But on the older models of these aliens, I never can quite get the head to tilt back as far as I want to. So generally I'll just keep that plugged in, as it certainly looks a lot better. It looks a lot more finished, definitely on the back there. Much like with the other Xenomorphs as well, this one does have and sports a wireframe tail. The wire starts at the base of the tail and runs all the way full length to the very end. Stops at about here. Well, you can almost see it right there. That's where the wire stops. And this does allow for a lot more of additional posability. It also adds a lot more stability too. With a lot of these Xenomorphs, especially the older ones based on the '79 movie. Usually a lot of times I'll have them more standing straight up to evoke the same design it had in the film. And then I'll use just the tail as a supporting structure, sort of like a tripod. And the tail sort of helps to keep the alien from falling over, which is good. Articulation on this particular one, let's have a look at that right now. The head rotates back and forth. You will want to be careful, of course, because there's these tubes that come out from the jaw there. it comes from the back of the jaw and it runs all the way to the very back, attaching to the back of the torso. When you are moving the head back and forth, just be mindful of that you don't twist and jerk it too much for the risk that this could break off. I haven't had that happen so far, knock on wood, on any one of these Xenomorph figures, but it's not to say you should not still be very careful. I guess you could technically count that there's articulation in the mouth itself, and there is that, like I said, that little inner jaw, which is a little bit difficult to get. Generally, if anything, I use like a screwdriver, for example, and then sort of fish that out. But it does have articulation in the mouth as well. Yum, 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 yum. It has articulation as well in the top torso. You can hinge the arms out at a 90-degree bend, or almost a 90-degree angle bend. You can rotate those arms all the way around, and you can bend at the elbow. Double hinge on the elbow, by the way. And you can also rotate those hands individually, of course, all the way around and hinging back and forth. I'm sure you're probably going to be asking the question, what kind of joints is this one using? Flipping it up, actually, they are using solid plastic. No, they're not making the mistake of using clear plastic for these hinges and pegs. Because, of course, clear plastic back in the day was susceptible to always breaking. So luckily they're still using the solid plastic for these joints. Even though the Xenomorph comes across translucent, I'll be happy to report though that the pegs themselves are not. Finally, the legs do split out. You can sort of see how the mechanics work underneath there. It's attached via ball joints. And the legs, like I said, just hinge out. Almost can get a full splits. Well, I guess you could get a full splits on the Xenomorph. And then you can move the legs forward, you can move the legs back. It has a swivel, essentially where it's just attached to that cup joint at the top there. It has a double hinge on the knee, and then it has articulation on the foot, both front and back. You can ankle pivot, and there is also toe articulation. So that's always good as well. What's to really be certainly said for this particular alien? Well, again, if you had already picked up, say, this one, again with the legs being so considerably warped on this poor guy, the two figures, of course, show marginal changes, marginal improvements. Not enough where you're looking at and saying that's a brand new figure. No, sort of in the way that Dallas is. There seems just enough subtle improvements with the paint more so than anything else, that when you do put them side by side, if this one eventually will stand for me, you'll see that there is, like I said, there is that difference between the two. This one went with a lighter color clear plastic, and then sort of just paint brushed over top of it, more of a almost an off-white, eggshell white, for example. Whereas this one kind of goes more the route of a more yellow color. Whatever decision you decide to go with. It's definitely an interesting design Xenomorph. For based on a costume, there it goes, for based on a costume that never really made an appearance in the film, and yet has as much a history to it as the '79 film itself. It's always interesting to watch documentaries on how films got made. Not only do you see how the film got made, but sometimes you get a sneak peek at some of the scrapped ideas that were initially planned for the film, then abandoned later. Case in point here is the original '79 prototype suit. This was the way the suit was intended to look, until they realized it just wasn't working out for them, and they decided to paint it all black. While I feel like the longevity of the Xenomorph would not have held up, I think, using the prototype colors, it's definitely a very different take on what the Xenomorph actually did look like. And truth be told, again, it's just a swapping out of color. Instead of going with this off-yellow eggshell color, they again just went with an all pitch black. I personally prefer the all pitch black look, but definitely this one has some interesting elements to it. When I look at this reminds me, and I was trying to think the best way I could describe when I'm looking at this. And I think to myself, if you've ever seen an insect maybe hidden behind a shelf, like a centipede, and it's long since died, it's sort of the carcass remains, where you can slightly see through it, but it still has left its exoskeleton. That's kind of the thing that I get when I look at the prototype here, Alien. It's sort of a shell of what we actually got, as if it almost left the skin of it behind. Again, it's really interesting because we never saw this in the film, but it's cool the fact that NECA would release, now a second go-around, what the prototype suit or what the original Alien suit was supposed to look like. Let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think of the prototype suit. Do you feel there would be a franchise of Alien films if they kept the colors here of the prototype suit. I personally say no. I think the black, all black Xenomorph, I think works a lot better for the character rather than going this route. So I'm kind of glad in a way that they decided to scrap it in favor of, again, all black. But let me know your comments down below in the comment section. If you guys are new, by the way, to this channel and liking the content that you're seeing, consider the idea of hitting that subscribe button down below. Consider the idea of moving over to the bell notification. And consider the idea, of course, of staying tuned, because there's going to be definitely a lot of videos coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.